So guys, as you know, UFC 298 is coming up on the 18th of February. We're going to be discussing the main event today between Alexander Volkanovski versus Topuria, and just some interesting comments that I thought Alexander Volkanovski brought up recently about some recent moves that he's planning on making, as well as just touching on the rest of the card. So let's get right into it. Because I think over the next few months, the UFC is spoiled. You know, as UFC fans, we couldn't really ask for much better matchups coming up over the next few months. I know a lot of people have been bitching and complaining about UFC 300 and several other UFC pay-per-view events, but I think personally we're very spoiled for choice, and the UFC pay-per-views haven't looked this good in quite some time. I mean, let's just look at this card objectively. We've got Alexander Volkanovski versus Topuria, and then in the co-main event, we've got Robert Whittaker versus Paulo Costa. Robert Whittaker obviously looking to bounce back against his loss against Duplessis, coming up against Paulo Costa, who's obviously been a bit of a pull-out merchant. So it remains to be seen if this fight is going to actually take place, right? We don't actually know if Paulo Costa is going to show up. It seems that, obviously recently that he had a legitimate injury, but when there's a pattern, you do start to question whether this fight's going to take place, with Paulo Costa pulling out of his last few fights. We've got Ian Garry, the cuck, taking on Jeff Neal in a welterweight bout. Is there anyone less likable than Ian Garry, by the way? I don't think there's a less likable UFC fighter on the roster right now than Ian Garry. You know, the reason why Sean Strickland's so popular and Colby Covington isn't, even though they both say sort of outrageous things, is because Sean Strickland is authentic, Colby Covington is not. And that's basically what it comes down to. The UFC fans don't particularly care if someone's like a good guy or not. They just want to know that someone's authentic. And Ian Garry is not authentic. His wife writes his scripts for him in his interviews, and he's just a weak, pretty weak, mentally. Mentally weak individual. Very inauthentic, and people don't like that. I certainly don't, but I do think nonetheless that he's going to get the victory over Jeff Neal at UFC 298. I think the youth is on his side, and Jeff Neal is aging a little bit, and I think he's going to find it very difficult. Now, the next fight on this particular card is Henry Cejudo versus Merab Dvalishvili. I know a lot of you guys are going to give me crap for not being able to announce that guy's name, but far out. Dvalishvili? I think that's how you pronounce it. But this one's going to be a great fight. Obviously, Dvalishvili, 16-4 in the UFC, facing off against Henry Cejudo, who's obviously got one foot out the door, as it seems so far in his career, obviously coming back from retirement and losing to Aljamain Sterling in that championship bout in what was a very close fight, but I think Henry Cejudo with one foot out the door, he's an Olympic gold medalist, so he is a fantastic wrestler, and Merab is obviously a great wrestler himself. But just because Henry Cejudo is a gold medalist doesn't necessarily mean that his wrestling is better suited for mixed martial arts than what Merab's is. I think Merab has shown his tenacity in his fights and his willingness to just spam takedowns Khabib style on his opponents, and I think Henry Cejudo will find that very difficult to deal with. I just don't think after, Merab is going to lose this fight, if I'm completely honest with you. Obviously, Henry Cejudo has had a lot of time off. He's only fought once. I was quite impressed to see that, obviously he came back and put on such a showing against Aljamain, but I think with one foot out the door, Merab's probably going to get the victory here. And then we've got Hernandez facing off against Roman Kopylov. Not really going to talk about that because I have no idea who these guys are. But other than that, I think we've got a pretty good card in our hands. Now, we're just going to touch on some comments that, Alexander Volkanovski made recently about not only his fight against Topuria, but his plans after this contest. And it appears that he's set on not having his lightweight dreams being dead. Obviously, we know he faced Islam Makhachev in 2023 in February in Perth, Australia, in what was a fantastic contest. Arguably got the victory, but when he got the rematch late last year, he got finished quite quickly. It wasn't even a competitive contest, but I think there's a potential avenue for him to compete at lightweight again, considering the circumstances surrounding, that loss. Obviously, going into fighting within just a couple of weeks' notice wouldn't have been an easy task for any man. So I think that sort of somewhat leaves the door open for him, but he definitely has his work cut out for him against Topuria. Okay, obviously the guy's an up-and-coming young prospect, and when you look at Topuria, he's 27 years of age, okay? And he's young and hungry. Obviously his body isn't as aged. When you're younger guys, you're more able-bodied. It's just the way that the human body works, and it's unfortunate. Otherwise, we would see guys that are 45, 50 years old absolutely dominating the UFC because, theoretically, as you age, you've been training the sport longer. you'll develop skills that you wouldn't have as a younger man. But unfortunately, our bodies break down on us. And I think, unfortunately for Alexander Volkanovski, he's sort of at that point right now. Okay? Topuria is 27 years of age. Alexander Volkanovski is 35 years of age, all right? I'm 33, and I'm telling you, I don't feel as good as what I did at 27. And I think Volkanovski would be feeling that exact same thing, as would most people, especially when you consider he's a professional and elite athlete, right? I'm sure he'd be going to the physiotherapist, the chiropractor, getting dry needling, and all these sorts of things to mitigate the damage that he's caused to his body over the years training mixed martial arts and fighting at a professional level. You know, so I always am a bit, antsy when I see fighters at the age of Alexander Volkanovski, especially over 31, 32, you're getting up there. It's going to be very hard for you to compete with these younger lions within the UFC, And that's why we've seen Tony Ferguson, 39 years of age, he's fallen off a cliff. So I think everyone that's coming out and saying that Alexander Volkanovski is going to dominate Topuria are going to be very surprised. I think they're going to be very surprised. I mean, I'm not saying that Alexander Volkanovski is going to lose this fight. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I think anyone that thinks that Alexander Volkanovski is just going to absolutely dominate him is going to be very surprised, Topuria is a very, very mean dude, a very fantastic striker, and he is able to submit his opponents. 8 of his career wins have come by a submission. So he's definitely no joke. And compare that to Volkanovski's ground game of only 3 submissions. Topuria has a chance to submit Volk here, even though I don't think that's particularly likely. Probably Topuria has a chance for a decision victory or a knockout victory over Alexander Volkanovski, because don't forget, that knockout he got against Islam Makhachev was absolutely brutal. It was absolutely devastating. Within the first round there, getting absolutely demolished, It was hard to watch. It's always hard to watch a fighter get knocked out like that, especially at the caliber of Alexander Volkanovski, because it can change the course of their careers. I mean, just look at Tony Ferguson. That's why I'm worried about the upcoming fight between Justin Gaethje, and Max Holloway. Max Holloway is facing off against Justin Gaethje, who could cause the decline of his career as well. So, obviously, Topuria is no joke. Coming off a win against Josh Emmett, albeit a decision victory. But in my opinion, he absolutely dominated that fight. Dominated the striking and gave Josh Emmett a lot of troubles. And his resume isn't particularly impressive up until this point. He's still sort of on that cusp of, becoming a superstar. But I think in 2024, this is the situation that Alexander Volkanovski finds himself in, as well as fighters like Dustin Poirier. Okay? They're all aging, and this young blood is coming up. And 2024 could definitely be a changing of the guard within the UFC. And that's what I fear for Volkanovski at UFC 298. We're going to be seeing quite a bit, and regardless of whether Volkanovski wins or loses this fight, it's going to tell us a lot about his future. How dominant is he? Is he able to dominate Topuria the way that he has dominated nearly every one of his opponents within the featherweight division over the last 4-5 years or however long it's been? He's been absolutely incredible. So I think it's going to be able to, tell us a little bit more about where Alexander Volkanovski sits, and obviously the potential of Topuria as well. So I'm very excited for UFC 298. Who do you guys think is going to actually win this contest? For me, guys, I don't know who to pick. Because it's just going to be a hard call. I think Topuria is going to upset him, to be honest. My gut feeling just tells me that this is going to be the end of Alexander Volkanovski's reign. At 35 years of age, you don't really see many fighters win title fights after this age, unless they're, in the heavier weight categories. And even then, they've got a couple more years of elite level performance before they start dropping off the map a little bit. So that is my prediction for UFC 298. I just think Topuria is going to have the youth on his side, the speed, the stamina, and he's going to overwhelm. I'm going to pick Topuria via a decision here. If he doesn't get the decision victory, I'm picking a knockout within 3 rounds. The reason for that is Alexander Volkanovski has probably come back a little bit too quickly after his knockout against Islam Makhachev. But thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Let me know what you guys think about this contest. Who you think is going to pick up the victory? And don't forget to subscribe. Take care.